Hi there. So just to introduce ourselves, my name's Catherine and I'm Director of Focal Point Gallery in Southend-on-Sea, where you have a show opening in a couple of weeks' time.
Yes, my name's Rosa. I have a show for a couple of weeks' time, and we're here at my studio at Hypha Studios in Camden Passage.
So how long have you been in these studios?
About just coming up to 6 weeks now. We're having 7 weeks in total.
Because it came about in a really timely manner, in the sense that you're just finishing the works for the show, which you've been working on for, I guess it's been a year, quite an unusual year, which we can talk about. But yeah, I guess that kind of perfect timing in terms of having the space.
Yeah, definitely, because I mean, it's, as you see, it's such a big space and it's kind of close to my house and really good in those ways, but it's also just amazing to have a free space at a time when I didn't have any studio space to just really experiment and making some stuff that's really, really large. I think it feels so, it feels like such an exciting kind of relief and release as well, to be able to make such giant work at the end of the year where it will be kind of like forced into really small spaces, working from home and stuff. So yeah, it's such great timing and really, really nice.
Yeah, and also just that the tactility of the work and that idea of making things when we've all had to live such a virtual existence as well. And I guess we'll talk about the kind of the works that are in progress in a minute, but maybe just to kind of talk about how we kind of got to this point in terms of the work you're making, because I guess it's been quite a journey. Your work's primarily in the past been performance-based, but very early on in our discussions about the show, which was, we invited you to show pre-COVID-19, but obviously that came along and it became apparent that performance-based work wasn't going to be possible, but actually because we're also co-publishing the book of your writings, that became a focus as well. So maybe just to kind of describe the kind of process, because I feel like your work does really respond to this extraordinary year that we've had, but how, maybe just describe a bit in general, the context for this show.
Yeah, I think it is quite interesting really to think about making a work where I wasn't going to feature in it, like as myself, or be performing myself live, because it really shifted the work into, well, it shifted my thinking about performance as the subject, rather than performance only as the medium. So one of the works that I made, which we'll maybe show in a bit, like some tests of, was this piece that referred to, like, I was really thinking about when was like the first time that I performed, and I was thinking about performing in the Nativity at primary school, and that's such a really big part of like school and how we learn to perform, and such a big part of British culture. So I think that I was thinking about that, and then I came to think of the role that I played in the Nativity, which is the role of one of the three kings to visit Jesus. So I was really thinking about what is performance, what performances have I done in the past, and how does that really shape who I am.
Yeah, and I guess also in the way you created the works, you're really repositioning the viewer as the performer as well in the show. So the work you're talking about revolves around Balthazar and his depiction across art history from medieval times as one of the three kings. And you did a huge amount of research with your assistant as well to kind of identify all the Balthazars and almost, it's the chronology really of different art histories, but then also what's fascinating is you can really see sort of individual figures emerging as well in terms of how that iconic kind of character, if you like, saint rather, has been represented.
Yeah, because it is really interesting to do that research with Nasra and find all of these Balthazars throughout the ages. It felt to me like, at first it felt like a real kind of documentation of Black presence in the history of art, because Balthazar is one of the only Black characters in the Bible, also one of the only Black characters in the history of art and medieval painting, and going right up, it's like he's a traditional Black figure, which is something that's quite rare. So collecting all of these images of Balthazar was really like a demonstration, like we are here, but as Black people. But also it kind of it goes a bit beyond the symbolic, because every single person is like, every time you see a painting of Balthazar, they're based on a real Black person or an idea of a Black person, or maybe a Black person that the painter has seen in the street. So it's really interesting and exciting to think about like their individual lives. Like they're all a Black king, they're all depictions of a Black king, but they're all different people who have different families and have different roots to Europe.
So what we're looking at now is a sample when we were trying to figure out the best kind of print quality for the work that's in the show. And in the show, what you've done is collect all of the Balthazars together that you found into this amazing kind of billboard of Balthazars across the ages in new friendship groups. Do you want to tell us a bit about why you did that?
Yeah, sure. Like when I was looking for images of Balthazar, like there were loads. It's such a popular painting from that time. The Adoration, or the Visitation, as it's called. So there were so many depictions of Balthazar, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. So me and Nazra, my research assistant, we were like collecting all of these images, and then at first I kind of had them then displayed individually, all the different Balthazars. But I was really keen not to like replicate the isolation that those Balthazars were already in within the archive and within our history and within their position in those paintings as like the lone Black figure. So that's when I came up with the idea to cut out each of the Balthazars, and then put them in relation to one another. So yeah, hence putting them in friendship groups, thinking about how they could kind of create, how the collage, the billboard itself will like create a new story. Other than the one of like isolation and tokenization, and basically a kind of storyline of like the good immigrant who like comes and pays homage, which is the kind of storyline they were caught up in the Bible. In the billboard, I'm really trying to show them as individuals in relation to one another. Do they have friends? Do they have sons? And hopefully in that way you start to think about these not as the Black character, but as people, and thinking about them as people, but then also thinking about people who posed for these paintings as people with their own lives as well.
Yeah, it does look amazing, I have to say. Maybe going back to, I guess the starting point when you were thinking about those kind of early years in school when, like you say, your first performance, but also, I guess, first encounter maybe in many school situations in Britain with a Black person of importance, but also how that became also a formative experience for different children and what impact that has. And maybe then, because that kind of education, institutional setting is so important for the show, so it'd be great to, if you could tell us a little bit about that context.
Yeah, definitely. I think what is really, I guess like the biggest inspiration for the show was kind of the period over the summer, which was when the Black Lives Matter protests took off again around the death of George Floyd in America. So as part of that, there was like a reignition of a lot of different conversations that were perhaps already happening in the UK, but were like kind of like thrown up into the fore. So one of them was around the Black curriculum, the debate about who tells history, what history is taught at schools, and I guess essentially what that boils down to is how does education, how does what we learn in school affect our whole lives? How does our experiences as children really shape who we are as adults and the kind of people we become? So in some way this work that we've just been talking about kind of sits in that, because it's a character that is offered up in school, that is a Black character, is one of the very few, but they're still offered up in a very two-dimensional way. People who are Black and brown children who were born in this country are kind of cast in the role as a visitor as a visitor, and I was quite interested in how could examining how performance operates in that way, in that case to kind of isolate and exclude, and then thinking about, okay, what could be what could be different, trying to think about different ways of doing performance that are inclusive and self-building and create a positive sense of identity.
And in the exhibition there'll be 2 scrolls that sort of hang either side of this wall that we're describing, and that's your writing as well, I guess, which is, I guess, commenting on some of the things you just talked about. But as we were saying, it's, as a viewer, it will be a very performative way of reading those scrolls and kind of sort of trying to think about all of the kind of context to these figures that we're looking at. Why did you decide to present your writing in that way, and is that quite amusing for you?
I think I was quite interested in having them. I was thinking of them as kind of like proclamations, like declarations, and about, I guess that's quite an empowering way to think about, like thinking about stuff that you say in public. I think they're very like public. I'm trying to make them into kind of public text as opposed to like something private that you'll read in a book on your own. So thinking about the text on like a really grand scale, like the scale of like the human and the scale of the city, rather than like thinking about it on the scale of like your hands. I've been really interested in the link between text and protest, and how text might, like the content of the text might motivate you to literally move. And I think obviously when you print text that big, it does mean that the audience does have to move and really like engage with the text on the physical level as well as like a mental level. So I was quite interested in playing with that. I have done it a bit before with much smaller scrolls, but everything is much larger this time, which is funny because it's been all made in such a small space up until now, and so
not even able to visit the gallery, is it even? But it's been great working with the designer Rosa Johan Uddoh as well to help with that. And the scale, like we're one-to-one, relationship with these art historic figures. But maybe also the kind of educational setting allows us to talk about the other works that you're making in the studio, kind of literally right now, ready to be picked up tomorrow. Should we move over there? Cool.
So here we are in the tea station. I was thinking about the ways in which history is made at school, and like one technique that I really remember doing is when you would write something and you would try and make it seem like more authentic or like more historical. So you would tea stain the paper and like maybe put it in the oven and then burn the edges. Everyone has kind of different techniques. So it's quite interesting in this, like as a really literal like history making technique that is put in the hands of children, and working with that in a really like large, exaggerated scale in order to unpack it a bit, see what it means.
It really takes you back to that kind of school moment of and that sort of excitement of creating something as a, which I guess is, I just thought in terms of, making something as a child, but then this is a process of creating a new artwork as well. So it's that kind of excitement that in terms of that tactility, but also obviously commenting on, creating history. I mean, that's the kind of very notion, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
When you kind of create the idea of maps and something old. And then, obviously there are many, many different ways in which history can be told and made and brought into meaning, and that's, very much what lies behind, your interest in making the work as well. It's almost like a physical manifestation of that.
Exactly. I mean, I think it's been really interesting to kind of revisit as well. It's kind of like a muscle memory, isn't it? It's like everyone remembers doing it. It's like interesting how much you project into the process, and like remember the times you've done this before. One of the things I was thinking about, which is like so crazy, but at secondary school, I think in like year 7, we had to make a slave diary at school, where we had to write a diary as if we were a slave, and we had no real guidance, so it was like a summer holiday project. And I distinctly remember after I'd completed mine that I tea-stained the whole thing.
And you remember that again when you were messing them? Wow, that's like, yeah, maybe it's deliberately buried memory.
Yeah, perhaps. But it's here now. So, but yeah, it's really connected to. I mean, that is it's the ultimate thing of how you make your story truthful. You like make it the truth by doing the final kind of seal of the tea bag. So it's really interesting in terms of like what stories are believed, what stories are deemed authentic, what stories are deemed as like proper stories or proper writing.
Yeah. And authenticity and
yeah. So it's funny.
So what were these? These aren't finished, are they? Were they?
No.
What do you have left to do?
So these are going to be cut out, and I was quite interested in kind of cutting them out. Kind of they'll have like a jagged edge, and then banding the edges, as is tradition in this craft. I'm quite interested in them kind of appearing like partly as maps, partly as kind of countries, a bit like ink blots, like kind of the ink blot test, and leaving them quite abstract. So quite interested in like what people read into the shapes and read into the materiality, because I think this is such a loaded medium to work with in terms of like triggering memories in people's childhoods, and I hope that it's something that people will relate to, and then lead them to consider their own childhood and their own education as it relates to history making and history telling.
And particularly because these works will be presented in the same space as another work presented as a scroll you're trying to establish with brush. Which is all about kind of the layers of history and where history begins but what's known currently. Do you want to say anything about that? I'm just thinking, because that juxtaposition I think will kind of obviously inform these works as well.
I think it's like, I guess the poem is kind of like a protest about how we're only taught, often at school you're only taught about black presence in the UK beyond the Windrush landing at Tilbury. But actually there was a black presence like for years and years before, kind of how the Balthazar's shown and evidence as well. So I guess it would be interesting. I think it's maybe also interesting to think, it'll be interesting because they're both talking about history, because the maps are talking about history telling, and that talks about like a lost history. But also I think even thinking about these as brown materials as well, and I guess tea quite literally is a kind of colonial material that's like so tied to the history of colonisation, particularly the history of British colonisation of India and other countries. So I think it's just to think a bit more deeper about what does it mean to use tea as a medium. What does it mean to also this dyeing process, because this starts off as white. It's actually you can see it's like photography paper. That's just the biggest paper you can buy, and then scrunching it up, like going through that whole process from like something that's just white and pristine, scrunching it up, tearing it up, distressing it with the tea, and really dyeing it brown and getting. Like you have to dye the paper like multiple times to get it a deeper and deeper shade of brown, and the whole space smells more and more of tea. So it just feels like quite it's interesting work in terms of like colour and race and materiality and like and like the product tea, which caused so much like violence in a way, to like be working with these materials so intensely on such a big scale. Really. I don't know where I was going with that, but
and I think the work really has that visceral kind of presence that kind of denote so much, particularly in British culture. I mean, the smell of it, the look of it, the feel of it, and yeah.
I wonder whether people do this in like lots of other countries as well. Like, is it just a Western thing that you dye things with tea? I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's a very culturally specific idea of what it means to be old.
Yeah, that idea of maps and yeah. Thank you. I know it's not easy to kind of talk about a work when you're literally in the middle of making it and probably desperately trying to finish before the truck arrives tomorrow.
Yes.
But yeah, it's really fascinating to get, you know, and a privilege to kind of get that sense of I guess behind the scenes of the work, whereas normally. Yeah, the visitor would come and see the finished work in a gallery setting, which of course we hope everyone will at Focal Point. But yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. It's been great to show you around the studio a bit. I hope all of this, even it's such a big space, but I know it's all going to look a lot smaller as soon as we take it up there. So hopefully you've made enough. But yeah.
Well, as we said, amazing opportunity to actually just have this much space to work with.
It's so rare. Yeah.
Particularly in the middle of in central London, it's literally a rarity for artists to get access to this kind of space.
Exactly. It's a 180 from the bedroom experience before. So.